After the execution of Nicolae Ceausescu in December 1989, and before the clampdown of the new regime in June, there was a chance to assess some of the horrors inflicted on the Romanian people in recent years. This week's Omnibus examines the effects of Ceausescu's systematic destruction of towns and villages in a country that used to be regarded as architecturally one of the finest in Europe.
It's a symbol of the destruction of a city, of thousands of buildings, and the relocation of tens of thousands of citizens. It's the symbol of the hunger imposed upon a whole country because the money was needed for this building, the lack of electricity, the lack of heat. Remember the thousands of old people who died in the last 5, 6, 7 years. Remember the children who also died in the first months of their very existence. So all that is connected to this building and to the systematization. That was the real cost in human terms. That was the real genocide, not only what happened in December.
Bucharest was a city traumatized by fear, death, and destruction. Though there are still many shortages, people are trying to return to some kind of normality. One of the most difficult problems facing the city is the sheer scale of mass demolition carried out by Ceausescu. He personally ordered the destruction of a quarter of Bucharest. 500,000 homes, monasteries, and more than 24 churches were pulled down. To Romanians and foreigners, there seemed little sense in this brutal policy that Ceausescu called systematization.
Well, systematization was theoretically aimed to improve the setting, the urban setting, and to provide more opportunities for everybody and modern conditions of life. In fact, the systematization proved to be a total destruction of the old urban area. Some 85–90% of this area has been destroyed in many towns throughout Romania, and its replacement by a total new urban development, including the street network.
There are still small pockets of Bucharest that reveal the diversity of its architectural past, from the 19th century historical styles of Gothic and Neoclassical to the later styles of Neo-Romanian, Art Nouveau and Art Deco. In the 1930s, the city became known as the Little Paris of Eastern Europe.
They called it the Little Paris because it was a meeting point between Western Central Europe on one side and the memories of Orient and the Southeast Europe on the other side. So intellectually speaking, but also architecturally speaking, you had both faces of Europe. The new one, Paris, educated people, at the same time traditional people with roots deep into the past. I met people who looked at these new buildings and they said it isn't that bad. Romanians and foreigners. But they have no idea what was wiped out in order to clear the ground for these new buildings. There is absolutely no connection in architectural terms between the House of the Republic and any of Romania's traditional architecture. It's out of human scale. It's simply out of human scale. It's so, that magnitude, these huge areas covered by concrete are something which are never met in Romania's history. I would have admitted it if it were to show us the 21st century. That means, listen, this is something absolutely unexpected, but at least it's a kind of forward or preface to the future. No, it's just one moment of the socialist system connected to the Stalin era. It's out of Romanian space, and it's out of time, and it's out of the future. In my proper terms, it's a preposterous building against human nature. I think that he wanted to prove in architectural terms the almightiness of the system, the means of the system and the achievements. So he could say, look, you individual, you ordinary citizen, look, this is our system and it's able to achieve a palace of that magnitude. So you should notice that. That was one, politically motivated. Secondly, also politically motivated, if you have your own house, privately owned, then you have your privacy. I can invite you, and it's difficult for the neighbors to watch 24 hours what I'm doing. Whereas living in an apartment building, that means in a collective house, it's very easy. We are living on the same corridor, and I'm looking through my window, through my door, who is knocking at your door, and you're doing the same. It's a constant, it's a permanent supervision of your activities. So the control is easier in a collective building.
Much of the richness and variety of Romania's rural architecture comes from its ethnic mix: Hungarian, Serbian, Ukrainian, and German. Nearly every village and town in Romania had been assessed for either systematization or demolition. In 1989, demolition had begun in the old German town of Sighișoara, in the heart of Transylvania. The rebuilding plans had included a new town hall and a parade ground. The revolution in December brought the work to a halt, but not before a great deal of damage had been done.
I felt so bad. I felt like they were tearing parts of my body. When I saw that these houses had no more windows and doors, they remained always with the frames. I compared them with the head of a dead man who didn't have eyes and mouth, just holes.
Marcela Duca was the town's only architect and one of the few people prepared to criticize this method of centralized planning.
When I came to Sighișoara after finishing high school, the plans for the center of the town were already made and the decisions were taken, but and I couldn't change anything. I didn't like these plans, and I didn't think that they are suitable for our town, because I wanted the buildings to be integrated in this atmosphere of Sighișoara, in this medieval atmosphere, the atmosphere of an old town. I tried to convince them that this way of thinking is not good for this town, and they have to have a heart for this town and feel things. And I wanted to try to explain them that it is very important if we do a nice architecture for our town, because it is the best way to teach people to appreciate the nice, you know.
The redevelopment of the old town centre was part of a much bigger scheme, the creation of a new town that was going to sweep right down the valley into the centre of Sighișoara.
The principal thing is wrong here, the systematization is wrong. I don't like the systematization because the blocks of flats are too close to each other and they don't breathe, they don't have the green spots, they don't have the playgrounds for the children and every services which are needed. There is no school here, there are too few shops and everything. The quality of the building is awful, very bad, but they don't have good materials. That's one of the reasons they are built so badly. If they don't get the concrete at time, if they don't get the bricks at time, the time they need it, then a work can't be good, you know. If they don't have what they need, and if they don't if they don't have the materials they need, and if the quality of the material is the quality you see, look at this. This way of planning and of constructing was imposed. In everything in planning, we had certain directions. A living room has to be 25 maximum square meters. The kitchen has to be so much, the bathroom has to be so much, you know. The space of the apartment was imposed, and you knew you can plan just such blocks of flats. They are all the same, all the same. They don't live, they are dead buildings. And I know that people can't feel good, can't live good and comfortable in such apartments. It is not possible. You are among walls like in a prison. That's my conception about it.
Most of these apartments were only constructed 3 years ago, and they're already in need of substantial repairs. This is the combined kitchen and dining room of an apartment intended for 2 people.
It is the worst example of apartment that I could give you. You see the walls, that there are many cracks in the walls, and the plaster is falling down and off the walls. And the pipes are wrong, the water is flowing all the time. They try to repair it, but they didn't succeed because the materials of which these pipes are made is very, very bad. And in these blocks of flats, there are always problems with the installations. These people who lived in this apartment, they had to move from here because they couldn't live any longer in these conditions. It was no more possible. And now I don't know where they live. People had to be content with very few. They had to live in small houses, they had to be content with few food, and everything had to be for everybody the same. The wrongest thing this dictator made was to change the way of thinking. That was the wrongest thing he could do, his greatest crime, because he taught people to fear, to live in the same conditions. Everybody was like a robot.
Compared to other towns, Sighișoara is lucky. It still retains much of its past. By the end of 1989, at least 29 towns in Romania had been totally rebuilt, and another 37 were in the process of being restructured. The effect is a series of cities that look unnervingly the same. This is Buzău, Râmnicu Sărat, and the town of Baku.
Yara. Și am spun pe foc, nu? Da, vezi și...
This country has 50% of the population living in the rural areas. And these villages are medium or small-sized, and it's based solely on the individual private-owned house surrounded by a garden. That was the way of living of the peasants since centuries. So changing all that and placing the peasant into the apartment buildings, that means really the total wiping out of the Romanian identity.
I did everything. Only those motives were done by someone else. I did all the rest. Here as well. Everywhere. And how did you do them? Like that. We placed the pattern like that, fastened it with 2 nails, and then we dipped the brush in paint. We took this off, these were the leaves, and then we placed the rose here, and here with the brush, and only the flower comes off. The paint gets through. And who designs the patterns? An artist, a painter. He does the patterns and we just cut them out. Is it important that the houses are well decorated? This is how we like them. We like our houses to be a little bit different.
Ceasescu had planned to demolish over half of Romania's 13,000 villages and replace them with large agro-industrial centres. In some villages, the authorities tried to remove the peasants by making their homes uninhabitable.
Was your house here? Yes. What was it like? 4 big rooms with parquet floors, walls made of brick, 3 barns. It was all demolished. How was it demolished? They just told us to go out and go away. And they came with the bulldozers and all the gear, and down came the house. When I remember things like that, I feel like crying all day long. How can I rebuild everything? I'm 68 years of age. What can I do from now on? I just look all day long at that rubble. No more yard, no more garden, no more house. I just live here in this shed. I hope he's burning in hell. We have been destroyed for the rest of our lives.
The villages nearest to Bucharest suffered the greatest damage. Cornetu is 15 kilometers from the city and is in the process of being rebuilt. It shows what happens when a prosperous community of peasants with their small holdings is systematized. Many villagers were only given a few hours' notice before their homes were pulled down. The Marinescu family was so frightened of the bulldozers coming in the middle of the night. For safety, they began living and sleeping in their garage.
Au realizat performanțe profesionale deosebite, ajutați, evident, de contextul social, politic în care trăiesc.
They started some demolition work from one end of the village, saying that the village was being systematized. From what we knew, it was illegal. There was no government decree for demolition. They did it by force when they found people who were afraid. I stood my ground. I kept saying to the other women, let's go out holding our babies, otherwise we'll be left in the streets. How can I leave my home with 4 children? How can I leave everything I've got? What am I going to do? Become a tenant? Did they threaten you? Threaten me and more. I kept saying, sir, how can you throw me out? Show me a valid law. Give me some kind of compensation. Did they come here with a militia? Yes, they did, with a platoon of militiamen. And the boys from the militia, they would start crying and say to me, don't set yourself on fire. What did you do when they came? I resisted the demolition. I threatened to set myself on fire with 2 bottles of petrol next to me.
Lenutsa and Marin Ceasescu's home was demolished and their land confiscated. The method used was to dig a large hole and bulldoze the house with all their belongings into it. Later, it was covered over as if it never existed.
Did they give you any time to take your things out? We took some things, anything that could be grabbed in haste. Did you try to resist? If we had resisted, they would have arrested us, taken us to the militia station and beaten us. Some resisted and they got beaten up, and then the people just shut up. The police was here and the Securitate. There was nothing we could do.
They were allocated an apartment in a new block. The flats had no doors, windows, running water, or heating.
How did you feel when you entered your flat for the first time? How could we feel but upset? We couldn't even get inside. Whenever I reached the stairs, my knees were shaking, coming from a beautiful household into these ruins. Was it bad in the flat? Sure it was. No lino on the floors, no decoration, everything a disaster. Debris on the floor. All the leftovers from plastering were there in heaps. Why weren't there any windows or doors? They wouldn't fit any, so that we had to pay extra and have them fitted. Most blocks were built by conscripts, sent over for 6 to 9 months with very little food. They did it fast. They did a rush job. So they wanted to go home sooner, that's why they didn't care. They didn't think of the people that would move in.
Lenuța and Marin found it impossible to live in this block, and so in desperation they bribed an official to let them move into a maisonette nearby. This too had no running water or heating, but it was at ground level and had a small garden.
The peasants are self-sufficient, and this lies at the core of the debate. The peasant with his or her little garden around the house was able to produce something and to sell to the free market, or so-called free market in a socialist system. So, in fact, the peasantry was the last social sector of individualism. And this part of the population, so large, half of the nation, had to be submitted to the same collective rules. This is why he was so adamant to destroy the villages.
For us, the peasants, it was a catastrophe, because they take me away from my small holding. They take my house and my land, they put me up as a tenant here where I pay rent. I've got no work, no money to pay the rent, no way I can make a living. At my own place, I had my vegetable garden, animals, I had a cow, pigs. Here I can't do that. Even this cow I keep with difficulty. I have to carry weeds on my back for 1 kilometer to feed it. That's how they ruined us. This is systematization for us, the peasants. A whole catastrophe.
The political motivation for me was overwhelming, because you cannot control a society which is deep-rooted into its own past. So if you have to build up a new society, and as they put it, you know, the socialist system, we want to build a new man, a new human being. Well, to get this new human being, you have to place him or her into a total new environment, social, urban, economic, political. So to make him or her totally dependent on the political power and on the state. And that was the purpose.
Să trăiți, tată, vecine, îți dea Dumnezeu sănătate. Noroc. Noroc, Ali.
Had he been in command for another couple of years, I'm absolutely sure that he would have completed the destruction of the villages.
What do you think will happen to this block of flats? I would prefer not to see it flattened, but we feel suffocated by it. It could be repaired and made habitable so that people could live there. Do you think people will live there? Maybe young people who don't know any better. I, for one, couldn't live there. I want to have my feet on the ground here, to hear the song of the turkey in the spring, to see the hen with her chicks, the lambs, the goats, and have my children brought up in my yard in freedom, with the bicycle, the pony, like in the old days.
Elisabetta Cozy and her family live in Kopcia Mica, a small Transylvanian town that has been turned black by industrial pollution.
What do you grow in your garden? We grow only maize and beetroot. Cucumbers, tomatoes, onions won't grow here. They dry up because of the acid from the factory. All my neighbors' trees have dried up, most of them. Our Morella cherry tree bore fruit only for the first 2 years after we moved here. But it hasn't anymore. It has not borne any fruit for the last 2 years. Are you trying to plant something else? Last year we planted only beetroot and maize because potatoes will no longer grow. And what happens when the smoke from the factory drifts along? Well, the soot is not so harmful as the acid. You'll see that white smoke over there. Can you eat your vegetables? They have to be washed first. And how do you wash them? With water and detergent, especially the parsley and the onion leaves. What animals do you keep? Chickens, pigs, we can keep those. Not sheep. We cannot have a cow because we cannot feed it. How many rooms have you got here? We have the kitchen here and 2 rooms. One for the children and one for ourselves. That's all. This is where the children sleep, on this bed here. How many children have you got? 7. In how many rooms? They all sleep in one room here. And the other room? This is our bedroom, where we sleep, myself and my husband. And tell me, how often do you have to decorate? Twice a year. We can only do it twice a year. We should do it more often. When did you last decorate? Before Christmas. We haven't decorated for 6 months. And what about the outside of the houses? My sister got fed up and painted her house in black, all in black. On the outside? Yes, she didn't want any other color. Otherwise, we have to do too much decorating. So she painted it all in black. And how long does it take to become dirty again? Well, just a few months. Are the children healthy? No, the little boy. The doctors told me he has a calcium deficiency of the spine. The other little girl, Ioana, has been having convulsions since she was 2 years old. Carmen the same. Simona was born with that growth on her cheek. The children are not exactly healthy around here, in Kopcia Mica.
Și copiii nu sunt cam sănătoși în domeniul ăsta aici la noi în Kopcia.
Why do people want to stay here in these conditions? Here in Copșa, people do not want to stay. But where could we go? Leave our homes and just go away like that? But I saw deserted houses. There are. There was a man over there. He didn't like what has become of his house. He set fire to it and took his furniture in the middle of his yard and set fire to it as well.
Nu cum o declara el că i-a luat foc.
For a few months after the revolution, the House of the Republic was open to visitors. It's still unfinished, and the question remains what to do with it.
It's obvious for me as a historian that in 20 years everything will be forgotten. It means all the suffering. The real symbols of the building would disappear. And, well, people would say it was an achievement. Even if it's ugly, even if it's so eclectic, even if it has no style, it's still an achievement. If you keep it, then you have to place it in a proper context. That means to explain to every generation through the textbooks, through the mass media. You have to keep it as a reminder of a system which was the ultimate expression of oppression and submission of man. There are so many things in this country to do and to improve that I would leave the question of this palace just on the last item of the agenda. This is my viewpoint, just to keep it like this for the time being. If you ask me, if I had the power, I would destroy it in 5 minutes, and that's all. But of course I can't do it. So I would leave it for the end of the agenda sometimes into the future, and not to focus on it now. It's absolutely wasted money to finish it now.